Come join me on my second channel, Jaguar Gator 8, where we'll talk all things college football. New video drops every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch the latest video. And now, on with our feature presentation. DeShone Kizer was a horrible quarterback in the NFL, and I think that goes without saying. He started 15 games for the Browns as a rookie in 2017, and he went 0-15 in those games. He led the league with 22 interceptions thrown, and had a touchdown-to-interception ratio of 1-2, which is abysmal for just about any year in the post-merger era, but for just 5 years ago is downright nauseating. Cam Newton was second in the NFL in interceptions that year with 16, and Kizer was over 37% worse than second place. That's how bad he was at turning it over. His accuracy was bad. Amongst all 32 qualified quarterbacks, he ranked dead last in completion percentage at 53.6%. And this was at a time where the league average was over 9 percentage points higher than that. His pocket presence was atrocious, as he had 3 games where he got sacked at least 5 times. Even though the Browns spent a second-round pick on him, which is pretty high draft capital, he was so bad that the Browns had no problem drafting Baker Mayfield first overall in 2018 and cutting their losses and shipping him off to the Green Bay Packers after 1 year. Yet as bad as Kizer was on the field, today, he's probably best remembered for what he said leading up to the 2017 NFL Draft, when he delivered the infamously hilarious self-evaluation that he had Tom Brady's brain in Cam Newton's body. Take one of the smartest quarterbacks of all time, put his brain inside one of the most athletic quarterbacks of all time, who was 1 year removed from winning the MVP back in 2015, and you get DeShone Kizer. Spoiler alert, he did not have that. That self-evaluation was pretty bad. But there's one that might be even worse than that you might not have heard of. This is former Arkansas running back Cedric Cobbs, and upon getting drafted by the New England Patriots in 2004, he delivered one of the worst comparisons of all time that has been forgotten, but deserves to be remembered, because 2 decades later, it's just as stupid and just as ridiculous as when he initially said it. And this is the story behind the worst self-evaluation in the history of the NFL Draft. Before I talk about what Cedric Cobbs said and just how ridiculous it was, we need some context to understand who he was, and why the Patriots even drafted him in the first place. Entering the 2004 season, the Patriots needed to improve their running game. Now I use the term needed to very loosely, because the Patriots needed to improve their running game about as badly as a rich person with a mansion needed to add a full-size indoor basketball court to their house when they've already got an outdoor one. Would it be nice? Absolutely. Would it make your life and your house better? For sure. But do you really need to do this? No. You're pretty well off as it is. The Patriots were coming off of their second Super Bowl win in 3 years after defeating the Carolina Panthers at Super Bowl 38, and they finished the season on a 15-game winning streak including the playoffs. But if there was a weakness to this incredible team, it was their running game, which ranked 27th out of 32 teams in yards, 24th out of 32 teams in rushing touchdowns, and 30th out of 32 teams in yards per carry. Their leading rusher, Antoine Smith, had over 1,100 yards rushing in 2001, but by 2003 was a shell of his former self, and finished the season with his worst year ever from a yards per carry average at 3.5, and his worst season from a touchdown angle at 3. He was subsequently released before the start of the 2004 offseason. And their second leading rusher, Kevin Faulk, despite getting 178 carries, scored as many touchdowns rushing in 2003 as I did. That is to say, he didn't score any. Now, to New England's credit, they bolstered their rushing attack before the draft even happened when they acquired the disgruntled 3-time Pro Bowler Corey Dillon from the Cincinnati Bengals. And with the benefit of hindsight, and knowing that in 2004, he ran for 1,635 yards and 12 touchdowns, while making the Pro Bowl and helping the Patriots win a 3rd Super Bowl, cementing themselves as a dynasty, that obviously turned out to be a good move. But even though they had their starting running back hole filled, they needed some depth. And throughout the draft process, Bill Belichick was not afraid to talk at length about specific running backs. Anytime you can get legitimate in-depth answers out of Belichick, you know that he's truly interested and fascinated in the subject. Based on his pre-draft interviews, it was very obvious that the Pats were going to target a running back at some point to be the 2nd or the 3rd guy behind Corey Dillon and potentially Kevin Faulk. He spoke on Oregon State running back Steven Jackson and said, "He's pretty mature. He has a good upbringing. I think he's a solid guy." The Pats didn't get the chance to draft him, as they spent the first of their 2 first-round picks on Vince Wilfork, which I think worked out alright for them. By the time they were on the clock again, he was gone. He raved about Tulane running back Mewelde Moore, who was the second player in Division 1A history at the time to have at least 4,000 yards rushing and 2,000 yards receiving in his career. As Belichick said on him, he's a good example of a player in an offense similar to ours, so he's pretty easy to evaluate. Tulane does a lot of spread stuff, spread offense, and a lot of times, he's out of the backfield. A lot of the times, he's in the backfield as a one-back runner. They run quite a bit of T formation, so you can see some two-back runs. He's the kind of guy that when you watch him, it's pretty easy to evaluate him relative to other players whose offenses may be less similar to either our offense or a pro-type style of offense. Based on that quote and how in-depth he went, you just knew that when the 4th round rolled around, that Belichick was licking his chops to get more. However, he went at pick number 119 to the Minnesota Vikings, and had a very solid career in the NFL as a number 2 running back. But when pick number 128 rolled around, the Pats were finally ready to draft that depth option. And with that, they turned to Arkansas and found the man that they were looking for. Enter a man by the name of Cedric Cobbs. If you asked people who the best running back in the SEC was around this time, there's a very good chance that most people would have said it was Cedric Cobbs. Now, the first 4 years of his collegiate career were a bit of a mixed bag. He had a string of injuries that decimated him. He separated his right shoulder in 2000, which is why he played 5 years in college since he was given a medical redshirt. He had a strained hamstring and a strained back in 2001, which hampered his production. And he had a turf toe injury in 2002, which kept him sidelined for a month. On top of that, he had significant off-the-field issues, when on July 11, 2002, he was found guilty of marijuana possession, driving while intoxicated, and speeding. He was actually pulled over at midnight on his birthday, so while the police were searching his car, he turned 21. It seemed like Cobbs was a walking red flag for a long time, when you consider his injury history and his legal issues. He knew that he needed to have a lights-out season in 2003 both on and off the field if he wanted to keep his dreams of playing in the NFL alive, and wanted to play professionally at the next level. However, to Cobbs' credit, he seemingly turned things around off the field. For him to be reinstated, he needed to meet 15 conditions set by head coach Houston Nutt, including but not limited to drug tests, speaking to school children, and going to class. He met all 15 conditions, and had his highest grade point average ever. By this point, Nutt was more than willing to put this incident in the past. And on the field in 2003, you might as well call Cedric Cobbs Vanessa Williams, because he saved the best for last. He finished the season by rushing for 1,320 yards, which was a career high. He averaged 5.8 yards per carry, which was also a career high. He scored 10 rushing touchdowns, which was also a career high. And by the end of the season, he had 1,354 yards from scrimmage, which was also a career high. There is a reason why Arkansas went 9-4 in 2003, finishing the season tied for their highest win total since they won the SEC in 1989. And that's because Cobbs was that good. And there's a reason why Arkansas won the Independence Bowl, winning their first bowl game since the 1999 season when they defeated Missouri. And that's because Cobbs was that good, as he was named the game's offensive MVP with 141 yards rushing and a touchdown. So the 2003 season was a great year for Cobbs to end his career on by his standards, but it was also a great year by conference standards and by NCAA standards, period. When you have 7 games in a 12-game season with at least 100 yards rushing, you know you're doing something right. His 1,320 rushing yards ranked inside the top 20 of the entire NCAA, and ranked second in the entire SEC, only behind Shawn Williams of Alabama, who had 1,367, so not far off. His 5.8 yards per carry ranked 5th in the SEC, and was the top total amongst all running backs in the conference with at least 200 rushing attempts. Not only did he also rank inside the top 20 of the entire NCAA in yards per carry, but amongst running backs with at least 200 rushing attempts, he ranked 5th, and was in pretty good company, as the only guys ahead of him were Darren Sproles, Tatum Bell, Kevin Jones, and D'Angelo Williams, all of whom went on to have pretty successful careers in the NFL to some extent. And after his great final season, the New England Patriots decided to draft him in the 4th round with pick number 128. The Pats felt that Cobbs' off-the-field issues from a few years ago were history, and that he could fill a void in the offense. Cobbs said that he was more grown up now, and more responsibilities, as he had a fiancée, a child, and another child on the way. As he said, "I now have to take care of my business, or else I'm going to be out on the streets." And Belichick said on Cobbs, "We're ready to bring him on the Patriots team, and we're really going to evaluate him on a moving forward basis." So far, so good. We all love a good second chance redemption story, and Cobbs was making the most of it. But then, Cobbs decided for some reason to talk about what he expected of himself in the NFL, and to how he viewed himself. And what followed was the worst and stupidest self-evaluation you're ever going to see in your life, making what DeShone Kizer said, somehow, seem reasonable. Now, before I go any further, I just want to clarify one thing and emphasize this highly important point. Players should have confidence in themselves. They should want to be great, and they should strive for greatness. If a player is saying that he only wants to be okay in the NFL, that's a red flag. I want my players saying that they want to be remembered as the greatest of all time, and want to be remembered in NFL history. So if a player says that, I have no problem with it, and I don't think that anyone does. Having said that, the moment that you start name-dropping specific players that you're equal to or better than, a la what Kizer did with Tom Brady and Cam Newton, that's when you start doing a double take and asking yourself, wait, hold on, what did you just say? And as bad as what Kizer said was with Cam Newton and Tom Brady, and as stupid as that looked, at least he only compared himself to the best traits of two people. He didn't also say on top of that he has the arm strength of Brett Favre and the toughness of Ben Roethlisberger. Because Cedric Cobbs decided that he was basically the greatest running back ever assembled, almost like he was made in a factory. After getting drafted by the Patriots, completely unprompted, he described himself as a combination of Fred Taylor, Jamal Lewis, Bo Jackson, and Earl Campbell. That's right, he described himself as a combination of four of the greatest running backs to ever play the sport. Aside from the fact that all those guys were first-round picks, and Cobbs was a pick at the very end of the 4th round, let's talk about all those guys he had the audacity to compare himself as a combination of, and as the best traits of. Fred Taylor was coming off of a 2003 season with the Jaguars, where he had a career-high 1,572 rushing yards, and finished 6th in the league in rushing yards as well. By this point, he led the league in rushing yards per game in 2000, he finished inside the top 10 in the league in rushing yards 4 times, and he had just under 8,000 yards from scrimmage in his first 6 seasons. As a side note, to learn more about the great career of Fred Taylor, one of the most underrated running backs of all time, click the card in the upper right corner. And the crazy part is that of the 4 guys that Cobbs name dropped that he was the best traits of, he might have been, at his peak, the worst of the bunch. Jamal Lewis was the best running back in football by this point. After running for over 1,300 yards in 2000 and 2002, finishing into the top 10 in the league in both seasons in that category, he was coming off of a 2003 season where he ran for 2,066 yards, becoming just the 5th player in the over 80-year history of the league, alongside O.J. Simpson, Eric Dickerson, Barry Sanders, and Terrell Davis, to cross the 2,000-yard mark. His 2,600 yards was the second most by any running back ever, only behind Eric Dickerson, who ran for 2,105 in 1984. Lewis was named a Pro Bowler and the AP Offensive Player of the Year for his efforts, and it's not hard to see why. But Cedric Cobbs was comparing himself as a combination of Fred Taylor and Jamal Lewis. And he didn't stop there. Bo Jackson is one of the greatest athletes in the history of American sports. He was a true cultural phenomenon in every sense of the word, and could do anything. He had the longest run of the 1987 season, the 1989 season, and the 1990 season, and could turn on the Jets at any given moment. He made the Pro Bowl in 1990. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry over his short career. He finished 3rd in the league in yards per carry in 1989 and 2nd in 1990. And if it wasn't for injuries, he could have been one of the greatest running backs to ever play the sport. For anyone to compare themselves to Bo Jackson, especially when they only play one sport, is somewhat absurd, especially for a player who hadn't even played it down in the NFL. But to compare yourself to him, along with the other 2 running backs, is absurdly absurd. But just like the Energizer Bunny, Cedric Cobbs kept going, because he didn't stop there. Earl Campbell is one of the greatest running backs in the history of the sport, and perhaps no player at the running back position, or maybe even in NFL history, had a better start to his career than Campbell did. He made 5 Pro Bowls in his career. In his first 3 seasons, he was named a first-team All-Pro 3 times, and led the league in rushing yards 3 times. He was instrumental to the success of the Love You Blue Oilers, and maybe single-handedly carried that 1980 offense on his back when he led the league with 5.2 yards per carry. I can tell you this much, it wasn't Ken Stabler doing that. He led the league in rushing touchdowns twice. He won the MVP in 1979, and finished 2nd in the MVP voting in 1978 and 1980. He was named the Offensive Rookie of the Year in 1978. He was named the Offensive Player of the Year in 3 consecutive seasons, becoming the very first player to ever do this. Today, he's one of just 2 players to accomplish this feat, alongside Marshall Faulk, who did this with the St. Louis Rams from 1999 to 2001. And of course, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. As a side note, to learn more about Campbell's legendary career and how he almost joined John Riggins in Washington during the 1980s, which would have been an amazing backfield, click the card in the upper right corner. For any player to compare himself as the best traits of Earl Campbell is crazy, but to do this alongside Fred Taylor, Jamal Lewis, and Bo Jackson? I don't even know what to say to that. If you wanted to say that you look up to those guys, that you try to style your game around them, and that you hope to join those guys one day as NFL legends, fine, knock yourself out. I've got no problem with that, and have no problem with honoring the past and honoring the legends of the game. More athletes should do that. But to say that you're a combination of those guys, and say that you're the best traits of four of the greatest running backs to ever do it? Holy cow! That's just ridiculous at every level. But maybe he could live up to his crazy evaluation of himself. Maybe this insane self-evaluation wouldn't seem so insane after actually watching him play in the NFL. Right? Absolutely not. What you're watching is literally every single carry, in chronological order, that Cobbs had as a member of the New England Patriots. To call these highlights is using the term highlight incredibly loosely, because I'm not even sure Gus Johnson could make these plays exciting, and he can make paint dry exciting. He ran the ball 22 times in New England and picked up 50 yards. The one game he actually got a significant amount of carries, which was in Week 13 against the Cleveland Browns in a game that the Patriots won convincingly 42-15, he sure made the most of his opportunity, running 16 times for 29 yards and averaging 1.8 yards per carry while also losing a fumble, which is a surefire way to get into Belichick's doghouse. For some perspective on how bad this game was and how bad he was in general, in 2004, the Browns had the worst run defense in all of football, and it wasn't even close. They ranked 31st in rushing touchdowns allowed and ranked 32nd in rushing yards allowed, allowing 2,314 yards over the course of the season, which comes out to an abysmal average of 144.6 yards per game. Here's a look at every running back to play the Browns in 2004 and have at least 15 rushing attempts during the game. You can see each running back and their total yardage in the game. Most of them feasted. You've got Tiki Barber clearing 100 yards. You've got Deuce Staley having one of the best games of his career when he went for 117 yards and a touchdown on over 5.5 yards per carry. You've got Jerome Bettis doing bust-like things by going for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. You've got Rudy Johnson having the best game of his career in that insane 58-48 shootout where he ran for 202 yards and 2 touchdowns. You get the idea. A lot of great performances against a very suspect run defense. This was a gimme. Heck, the Patriots game against the Browns came the very next week after that Rudy Johnson demolition, and the other Pats backs had no problem decimating the defense, with Corey Dillon running for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns and over 5 yards per carry, and Kevin Falk running 13 times for 87 yards and a touchdown, averaging 6.7 yards per carry. Cobbs was literally the only running back to struggle. He was the only one in the NFL that actually made the Cleveland Browns look like a legitimate run defense, and made them look semi-competent at their jobs. If you looked at how every running back with significant reps did against the Browns, he is in an entirely different stratosphere of suck. After the 2004 season, Cobbs never played in New England again, as he was released at the end of the 2005 preseason after being sidelined with an injury, which was a pretty common theme throughout his career at Arkansas. Eventually, he found his way on the Denver Broncos in 2006, where he ran the ball 3 times for 9 yards. But then, he never played in the NFL again, although he played in AF2, which was the minor league for the Arena Football League, playing with the Arkansas Twisters for a year. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. By the time his career ended, he had 59 rushing yards and no touchdowns. Earl Campbell in 2004 at the age of 49 might have been more effective than Cedric Cobbs was. So if Cobbs was comparing himself to a 50-year-old version of Campbell, then I take everything back that I said, because that was pretty accurate. In his very first game in the NFL, Earl Campbell had more than double the yardage that Cedric Cobbs did in his entire NFL career. In fact, if Earl Campbell only played the first quarter of his first ever game, which was in Week 1 of the 1978 season against the Atlanta Falcons, and then retired straight after the first quarter, he still would have had more career rushing yards than Cedric Cobbs. A combination of Earl Campbell, Bo Jackson, Fred Taylor, and Jamal Lewis, he was not. Not even close. Again, I have no problem whatsoever when players hype themselves up and think that they're good, and they desire to be one of the best. Go for it. Knock yourself out. But if you're going to be foolish enough to say after you got drafted that you are the best traits of a Hall of Fame running back, two of the best running backs in the game at the time, and two members of the Hall of Very Good, and arguably the most electrifying player in NFL history, who would have likely been a Hall of Famer if not for injuries, you better be able to back it up. And you better be able to score more touchdowns than me sitting on my couch. Because when he got to the NFL, the only entertaining that Cedric the Entertainer Cobbs did was off the field, with one of the funniest and worst self-evaluations in the 100-year history of the NFL. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.